Kia ora whānau. I just wanted to ask, have you guys noticed the increasing interest in wellbeing lately? Yeah. And I wondered if you wonder why that is. Yeah. Because in schools, it's actually about economics. Because the OECD is responsibilitising schools to enhance students' resilience and well-being to prepare them for futures of uncertainty and change so that they can contribute to economic success. And as a result, it's developed a plethora of wellbeing surveys which are developed through Western political and secular lenses. And I wonder what kind of data they capture, and I wonder who they capture that data for. Because I work with principals and they tell me that they find it really hard to work out everything that they do for wellbeing in schools, and that really surprises me because I know they do a lot, and hence that led to my research question: what are their perceptions about wellbeing in their school environment? So I took a qualitative approach, and basically I did and I took it with 10 Canterbury primary school principals in their schools, and that included mainstream secular schools, kura kaupapa, and some special character and faith-based schools. I took a short seated interview and then a longer walking interview around the school with the principal, and I said, hey, show me where and how does wellbeing exist in your school environment. And you may not have heard of mobile methodologies like the walking interview. They are very unusual, but they capture a different kind of knowledge to surveys because they can stimulate responses, including interactions with objects and people, and they can engender emotional responses and interactions, and you transition through different environments as you walk. And I chose this because I really wanted to get this deeper, meaningful and contextual connection with wellbeing in schools and get a sense of what are the issues within this environment. So I took audio recordings and I took some photos for transcribing purposes. And at first the principal's like, oh God, I don't know what to show you or where to go. But as we moved, we found that the environment threw up the provocations that kind of led us on our journey. So the reason why I'm here today is because wairua came up a surprising amount and ended up becoming a sub-theme of my thesis. I just need to take you through a little bit more background first. This is the very recent history of wairua in schools. Of course, I'm not going to be able to in time go back to wairua existed pre-colonialism and then sort of got caught up in religion and education, but it was actually inserted into the New Zealand curriculum in 1999. It sits in Te Whare Tapawha and it sits under Taha Wairua. And it's kind of sat there relatively uninspected for 20 years, to be honest. In 2007, school values were inserted. A whole list of values went in there. And there was no apparent attempt to connect those values with wairua. And where we are today is currently we're seeing this sort of overlay of wellbeing and success in modern learning environments that are sort of being associated with wellbeing. So that's kind of where we are. I wanted to show you this diagram. It's a bit blurry, but it's a screenshot of the current New Zealand curriculum on the left. And you won't see wairua popping out at you here. I just want to show you because it's tucked in that physical and health education within that entire curriculum. And I just wanted to bring the point to this coherence here, which is one of the overarching principles that they want to have in this curriculum, because that will become important as we go on. And then, just so you don't think I'm sort of bashing a neoliberal conspiracy theory drum, I've put over the 2030 OECD position paper, and you get that sense of the strong language that's coming into education here of these unprecedented challenges, uncertain futures, and this responsibilitisation of seizing opportunities. So that's kind of where we're at. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about the literature first before I go to my findings. So as I've illustrated, it appears that education was applying like this fresh icing of a conflation of wellbeing and success through economics and modern learning environments over this older cake of really separately baked wellbeing layers which had been pretty much left to set and forget. And And I looked at the literature to say what research and academics had to say about this in relation to wairua, and I found that the Ministry of Education's decision to confine taha wairua in the health and physical education really contrasted with Mason Dury's assertion that the whenua and wairua are one. And Heaton described this as a well-intentioned decision, but a really technical approach that had the ability to decontextualise, divorce and dilute Māori knowledge. And Hokowhitu went further to say it had the effect of taking the land away again for a second time. And we can see that values in wairua are separated, then they're isolated in the curriculum, and Fraser contends they're actually interwoven for both Pākehā and Māori, and they risk becoming fragmented when separate, which is a concern because Dury also tells us that values in wairua are mediated through long-standing connections to ancestors and people and environment. So that's what the literature said. And now I'll just jump to my findings. So my first findings about whenua and the natural world, and principals point out examples of spiritual life force in whenua, like when a principal spoke of giving an angry tamaiti a cold glass of wai Māori to help soothe them. And the school environment could provoke a sense of spirituality, as principals described the presence of spirit in wairua in natural places like calm oasis. And Fisher calls this the spiritual sense of awe and wonder. And similarly, they took me around the school into quiet spaces, reflective places in certain rooms or buildings or gardens. So wairua connection to whenua was clearly really important. But wairua wasn't only connected to whenua and why, because similarly to Dury, principals thought wairua was present in relationships over time. And I found it could be mediated through like kaitiaki guardians in the spirit realm, for example, when some young students had thrown their rubbish under the bus seat, they were reminded of a highly esteemed elder in the community who'd passed away and were asked how would he feel about their behaviour. And interestingly, no matter how modern or innovative a school was, the principals all wanted to take me to their office and show me their considerable collections of sentimental artefacts. And they were gifts and cards and things that students had made. And sometimes they were things that now these students had grown up and had their own children. And they also showed me things around the school like photos and memorials and gifts relating to staffs and students, including those who'd passed away. Interestingly, while I was undertaking my research at the time with this huge wellbeing mandate sticking its head up in schools, I found that many principals were having to draw on their own beliefs, values and faith when they had to come up with ways of feeding hungry students, or oversee fundraising efforts to create playgrounds because there was no funding or policies to provide for this. And they often spoke of wairua and faith and spirituality as being intertwined with wellbeing, both professionally and personally, as something that could get them through their own life and death challenges and could guide them in their practices and decisions. And therefore it could be a principal's strong internal drive to act, which stemmed from their beliefs and values, which led them to provide these buffers for students and whānau and staff against these incongruous government policies and funding. And I found the contrast could be quite extreme because we could be standing in front of a completely new modern learning environment and a sea of kind of churned up mud because there was no money for a play area. However, the incoherence I found in government planning and funding and wellbeing went deeper, as while secular schools started and ended their day quite often with karakia and reflection, they didn't actually have the support of government or human rights to do so. And only a few years ago, when some teachers raised concern about having to give karakia in an intermediate, the then Prime Minister John Key got involved with this, and he said, oh no, teachers can just opt out. And this is actually supported by human rights in their document about religion in schools. I think this is really important as we talk about it today, to kind of look at some of the barriers that exist for sort of exploring this further. And reflecting back on this earlier discussion of the new ideas over old ones, one faith-based school principal was amused by the introduction of mindfulness into schools as being something new, as it was something they already did in prayer for years. So why the cat's bowl? Because it illustrates an example of the diversity of wellbeing connections and relationships and wairua experiences that surveys are very unlikely to uncover. So what I found was the walking interview showed me is the lack of coherence in the curriculum and as a nation when it comes to wairua, which is a product of the set and forget approach to curriculum development and the mixed messages about wairua and secularism from government and society. However, I found it was really important to principals, and it was intertwined in wellbeing through relationships with people in space and place over time. And I found that by mobilising the data collection, we illuminate the context of wellbeing, finding what's potentially missed in wellbeing surveys, and that when we mobilise data collection, we humanise it. So, thank you.
So, a few minutes for questions. Okay, who's going to kick us off? Nobody. I'm beginning to take this personally, you know. Yes.
Kia ora. I've never heard about the walking interview. That sounds really interesting, and I can see how it would have worked in a school, but it could have been very distracting as well, couldn't it?
It does, and the literature speaks of that. So it's an approach based on human geography, and it's going to be very different to a seated interview. I had the short seated interview first. So, and of course you're writing that as you go. In your methodology, you're really talking about those sort of things which change, because it could be a rainy day, it could be a time where it's playtime, and you've got children running up to the principal or something like this, but all of those are great. They're just more provocations, more things to think about. So there's really not very many negatives in it because each of those things is something else to kind of consider. So it's definitely something that keeps you on your toes it's a nice methodology, and I think it would work well in a lot of workplaces as well. Thank you.
In terms of your interviews with principals, were the things that they said were helpful or not helpful in terms of external involvement in wairua? So where outside agencies, I'm thinking of things like religion in schools or even, you know, churches and so on in the community, were there things where there was a useful or perhaps more interestingly, things that were not useful to them but may have been well-meaning? Did you touch on any of that? Or was it more about their own systems internally?
I think it kind of came through because this was a sub-theme, and the sub-theme of wairua sat within a chapter of culture and values. So one of the things that was commented on was that insertion of values in 2007. It was created by a working group that worked on it, and they kind of created a draft list of values that they thought schools should have, and that schools would have to demonstrate how they were teaching those and operationalising them. But schools were also allowed to kind of choose their own, but the process wasn't very laid out well how to do that. So the sort of the thing is that some people who saw that wairua was connected with values saw that the insertion of values or that values could just be then redecided by the next principal or another board approach and then chucked out, that some of those beliefs, faith-based beliefs or wairua beliefs, were actually really enmeshed in those. So that sort of that approach to values didn't seem to be a good fit for them. Additionally, like with all these changes to school environments, in some of the kaupapa kura, they said that those values and things that sort of cross through wairua, like manaakitanga and everything, were actually embedded. So it's like, here's our huge oven. We have this here in our staff room because this represents our value of manaakitanga. So it was quite enmeshed. So I think some of our processes and the way that we are looking at education or wellbeing or whatever is sort of failing to get how it is every day. Yeah. If that answers the question, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Time for one more, I think. Yep.
Yes, I'm confess to being almost completely ignorant about any definition of wairua and what it consists of. And I wonder if you could either very briefly clarify that or offer a reference where I can get definitive definitions.
Thank you. There's probably a lot of like esteemed people here who could speak to that better than I could. I did a wairua wānanga with Wiramunenia last year, and I looked to him and his wife Leslie as being really important teachers to me about wairua. And so I can only speak to what it is for me in light of those teachings, that it's a complete sense of interconnectedness and that it's from the source of Io and integrated through why, as we learnt this morning, like the two waters, the water of the father, water of the mother, to make that third why of me. So I've got my own sort of obviously westernised ideas of what wairua is, but I'd probably not feel as comfortable to give a definitive definition from the world of Te Ao Māori about that. But interestingly enough, I think it's good for us, it's a good question to ask. I spent a lot of time in this, at the start of my thesis, looking at what wellbeing definition was and just found it to be a considerable mess. And that's hard because it's something that's really progressing, and again, it has a very colonising effect when we're sort of talking about well-being and resilience and everything like that. But we probably really need to have the conversation in New Zealand. What is wairua first? Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just add to? Oh, that was a bit loud. Just add to some references. I would hesitate to give a definition either, but I know Cleve Barlow has done a book. A kind of dictionary of Maori concepts, but I can't remember what it's called, but Cleve Barlow is the author. The other one is The Woven Universe by Reverend Mauri Marsden. He was a Maori tohunga and an Anglican priest and a philosopher, and that book is a collection of his writings. To me, that's been my education coming from outside of New Zealand, so just thought I'd share that. I think we're done. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay, I think we're congregating back in the main room for the final thing. Allow me to thank Michelle.